To my two friends who have made it their life's mission to get me to read the Silmarillion, congrats, you've won. I've succumbed to peer pressure. We have got it right here. I don't know why I did it like that. But I am about to embark on a month-long trip to the motherland, and I needed a big fat book, which this is not as big and fat as I assumed it would be. It's like 450 pages. But point being, the Silmarillion has made it onto the list. And then I've also got Once and Future King, because I've been on a bit of a Arthuriana kick lately. This thing has insanely small print, but you know, we're gonna do our best. I've got sticky notes. I will stick these inside my journal so that I can make notes. I'm not anti-annotation, but both of these books are really old and I wouldn't write on them just because, you know, it's got the fragile yellow pages. Both of these were antique store finds or used bookstore finds. I'm also bringing Sparrow because I figured I should probably bring at least something that's been written in the current century. And I'm also like halfway through Sir Gawain. I'm hoping that I can finish it tonight before we leave tomorrow morning because it's just thin and it wouldn't take me very long, but at the same time I don't want to leave it unfinished, so we shall see. So for a little pre-book recap, I am excited about this, but I am a little bit intimidated. I know it's supposed to read a little bit like a history book, and history books can be a little hit or miss for me if I'm not already interested in the time period or the topic. It's supposed to be very dense. I'm a little afraid that I'm just gonna space out. Hopefully though, once I get hooked, which seems to be what the thing is with this book. Like, people just get obsessed with it. My good friend Julia explained it as kind of like, because there's so much and so little detail, you get so much empty space to dig in and to think about. I do like that, but I imagine that would make it more interesting to think about after reading it, or to analyze after reading it, than an exciting reading experience in and of itself. I've read a couple of Tolkien's short stories in the past couple of years, but I haven't read The Lord of the Rings itself or The Hobbit since I was like 13, 14 years old. I've seen the movies, obviously, and they are by all accounts very faithful, but we shall see. Hello, I am chiming in from the end times, aka the future, when I've already read the book, to say that there will be spoilers abounding. I think a lot of this stuff, if you are in fantasy circles, you've already been spoiled for by fantasy osmosis, but maybe I'm just biased by the fact that I have friends who are obsessed with the Silmarillion, so there will be spoilers. There will not, however, be full summaries. I'll be talking about what's happening, but if you want to know what happens in the Silmarillion, this is not the place for you. I will just be having a lot of reactions and opinions expressed very ineloquently. You have been warned. Okay, I am back, having read the first two kind of, not extraneous, but the first two bonus foundational sections, and then the first 4 chapters. I have just been traveling for 28 hours with maybe an hour and a half of sleep among all that, none of it consecutive, hence why I look a little like a corpse. I was hoping to get more of this read, but the text is so dense that by like hour 10, 12, I was a little too tired to really comprehend it. Thus far, we've gotten through like elf Genesis, the creation of the world, and then we've run down the elf pantheon. It's explained how there was a war between the forces of good and evil with elf Satan. Well, not elf Satan. None of these are elves. I'm just saying elf because the text feels like a document, like a historical document, and it feels like the elves are the ones that would have written it. Okay, I got sick of holding my phone. You are now on a tea kettle, or balanced on a tea kettle. We've gone through Elf Satan and the wars between good and evil that destroyed the world and reshaped its geography, and the coming of the elves, which were the first people. So thus far, I am having a much better time than I thought I would be. I think I was a little intimidated with the first section, which I've jokingly dubbed Elf Genesis. I've called it that because it genuinely felt like the biblical book of Genesis. This genuinely feels like we're in the Bible. Like, obviously, Tolkien was very Catholic, so it lines up with his Christian worldview, but also some of the language used. There was something in particular that I didn't underline because I don't believe in underlining on a book this old. I think it was fullness of time. Anyway, but there's verbiage that feels very biblical. And then we've gone through to the pantheon, which, like, they're not quite gods, because they're still the big god, that they are a pantheon and that they each have like dominion over an aspect of creation. And I feel like this was a really clever way to keep to Tolkien's, you know, monotheistic worldview while still having the feel of these old myths that inspired him as a person who was a medievalist. From what I understand, these first two sections, you know, Elf Genesis and the Elf Pantheon, have been very boring for some people, and they're like, oh, I just have to get through that before I get to the elves. But I don't know, I quite liked them. It was, you know, dense, difficult to understand, but the language was really fun and poetic. As I understand it, thus far, the sun and moon have not been created yet, and the earth, or Middle Earth, is just in perpetual starry twilight, which feels a little like a metaphor, like it's at the beginning of times and everything is blurry and nebulous and murky and without boundary. But it's also just a beautiful visual of these people living, generations of people living in twilight. I knew that it was like Tolkien lore that the elves loved the stars, but the idea that they loved the stars because that's what they were made under in their infancy is very beautiful. I'm a little worried about the plants living in this perpetual twilight, but like in a world where the sun and moon are still a tree or two trees, I shouldn't maybe be thinking too hard about the logic, or at least I assume that these two fancy trees, one gold and one silver, are the sun and moon. Maybe that's a big assumption, actually. Maybe I shouldn't be assuming that, but I don't know, I feel correct. So thus far, information keeps repeating, sometimes having changed slightly or with different names being emphasized. Like in the first two sections, there was one name of big god that was used. I'll start using proper nouns as I keep going. I just haven't learned them yet. But there was one word of name for God that was used, and then in the second section it was like, oh, that one is used, but mostly we use this one, and it switched to using this name, which again makes it feel more like a document, like these were separate, disparate texts that were fused together, which is what happened in real life, it seems. Christopher Tolkien fused together different notes and writings of his father, and it makes it feel more authentically like a piece of history. I will say, there being 3 different names for literally everything is a little confusing, and I'm getting kind of lost. I have already lost track of the elf diaspora. There was one group that was kidnapped by Morgoth, aka Elf Satan, or Middle Earth Satan, and they were turned into orcs. And then they started their big trek towards Valinor, which I've been calling Elf Heaven since I was like 11, so I might keep calling it Elf Heaven. And then there were as they were on their big voyage, well, not voyage, I think they physically walked, but as they were on their big trip to Valinor, there were different groups that got left behind. Each group that was left behind got different names as they went, and then at the very end, Elwë, he was the leader of his group of elves, and then he got left behind, or he stayed behind, because he fell in love with a Maiar, which I interpret as like archangels almost, or like sub-deities, not quite up there, but yeah, they're their own category of thing. It's the Maiar. Anyway, but he fell in love with one of those, and then he stayed behind, and his group of elves are the Sindar, and I can't tell if the Sindar are the collection of all of the groups that were left behind and put together, or if one particular left behind group became the Sindar. I'm told that these confusions are normal and that you like pick it up as you go along. And then my friend sent me a chart of all the elf types, which I thought was hilarious. I love having a nerd hobby that I need resources to fully understand. So we're like this far in. Like, isn't nothing? Well, no, it actually is pretty close to nothing. I've talked a lot for it being only this far in. All right, so I have reached page 102. Right here. So this next chunk I read while I was traveling in the mountains, which gave the whole experience a very grandiose feeling that paired very well with the elf family drama. I didn't record while I was up there, even though it would have turned out very nice and very picturesque because I was with people the whole time. So now the elves I have notes. I'm taking this very seriously. The elves have finished their long trek towards Valinor. They're settling in and causing family drama to rival the most toxic of Thanksgivings. And I say they, but mostly I mean Fëanor, who is the oldest son of Finwë, one of the 3 big elvish kings. I think at one point I said out loud, Fëanor, I'm going to strangle you. And that appears to just be like the mood while reading this film. He's so, like, at one point, one of his brothers goes to their dad and he's like, hey, Dad, big brother Fëanor is like out of control and you maybe should do something about that.
And Fëanor bursts in and is like, ha, I knew you were conspiring against me, and holds his sword to his throat. And Fingolfin is just like, does not say a word. And it says that. It says he doesn't say a word. He just walks out of there and he's like, I'm not gonna get more involved than I already am. And like, real. That is so real. That's how you deal with a toxic family member. Fëanor's poor brothers and sons who were following him into all kinds of dangers and toils and trying so hard to be good family members, good brothers and sons, and, you know, keep the family together and be dutiful, and he just is not repaying them in any good ways. He just keeps getting worse and causing more problems. And I won't lie, I eat this kind of stuff up. I love complex kinship groups and mixed loyalties and complicated family relationships, especially between siblings. Just the intermingling of love and duty and the way that for better and worse, you cannot get rid of a family member, even if you give up a relationship with them, which in these older societies, that wasn't even something you could do the way people do now. But even if you do give up a relationship, the tie is still there. I predict more complex familial things to come because, like I said, there's a lot more book left. So far, I think Fingolfin, Fëanor's younger brother, is the character I'm most enamored with. He's the one that was like, hey dad, have we considered asking him to chill? He just tries so incredibly hard. And like I said, he keeps his mouth shut when he's threatened with his sword, and he immediately offers reconciliation when it's made available to him. And he follows his brother on his like suicide mission back to Middle Earth when that happens. Even he doesn't even want to go. He thinks it's an awful idea, but he had just promised to be loyal, and he doesn't want to leave his people under the like guardianship of someone as out of control as Fëanor. And after he does all of that, and he tries so hard, Fëanor leaves him behind, and he sails ahead towards Middle Earth without him, and he burns the ships. So I love it when characters try so hard and they're punished for it instead of rewarded for it. I have been giving Fëanor a lot of well-earned trouble, but I do enjoy it, but I don't dislike him. I think he's a lot of, okay, fun is a strong word, but he's really, really interesting. I think the part of me that is getting enjoyment out of him is the same part of me that stanned Anakin Skywalker in childhood, where it's like, it's a character that's so full of passion, and they are by no means necessarily the same, but it's a character that's so full of passion that it cannot be contained. Like, he's turned to 100 all the time, and it is said that, like, he's brilliant and intelligent and just does so many good things, right? So that passion and brilliance, it does result in a lot of goodness and beauty, but at what cost? So far, the cost of literally everything. I cannot imagine that he lives to the end of the book. It's a long book. But before he goes, I yearn for just a moment of like regret and reflection. But knowing him, it just feels unlikely. He's gonna keep standing his ground until he's buried in it, if that makes any sense. My friend told me that, because, you know, I've been updating my 2 Silm reading friends about my progress, and the texts that I send them make up the notes that I'm updating you guys on. But my friend told me that in a previous draft, when Fëanor burned the ship so that no one could follow him to Middle Earth and no one could go back for the people he'd left behind, his youngest son was actually left behind on the ships and he was burned alive. And why did we cut that? I wish we had left that in, because it's such an immediate and very personal consequence for his actions. And I also think that would give him a moment of like regret. His actions are coming to bite everyone in the butt, but not him directly. I mean, like he did get exiled, and that was funny because he got exiled and his dad did not beat any of the favorite child allegations by following him into exile. Like, King, your 2 unproblematic sons are still waiting right there, and you're gonna follow this sucker into exile. Fingolfin and Fingolfin and Finarfin, you are better than me. I would have been worse about this obvious favoritism. One last thing, I love that so far the book has been just getting like explanations of a lot of this stuff in Lord of the Rings that were just kind of in there and we didn't know what that meant. Like the elves go to Valinor and here's where the rings come from, which I haven't gone to that part yet, but I do know it's coming. We get backstory of the lore, we get explanations, except for the giant evil spiders. We have no idea where those come from. There's just giant evil spiders, and one of them drank all the light out of the trees. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Another thing that's caught me by surprise in a good way is that I feel that the narrative is starting to take shape. There's a story here, and a lot of the storytelling devices used are really clever. Like, I don't know, at the textual level, they're keeping these really ominous lines, like they did not know yet what their words would bear, in text foreshadowing. So those are very fun. And then I have also, earlier I was complaining that I did not understand the elf diaspora. I had just lost track of it. But I found a chart. There's a chart. Yay. There's also family trees, which, oh my gosh, speaking of family trees, Tolkien, I appreciate your dedication to the Anglo-Saxon love of alliteration, but for the love of God, I am losing track of all these elf names. I'm like 100 pages into the book, and we have Finwë and his sons Fëanor, Fingolfin, and the other one I always forget. He has a son named Finrod, and Fingolfin has a son named Fingon, and it's like, there's too many F names. I'm looking at an F name, and I'm like, I think I know which one that is, and often I don't. I will say that I am so glad that Fëanor did not continue this naming convention with his 7 sons, because I think I would have gone insane, and I think Tolkien knew this about me, and he, just for me, he gave them 4 whole letters. So it's Maethros and Manglor, and then there's 3 with C's in the middle, and then the 2 little ones with A's at the end. So that's 3 letters. You know, it's also funny that all his brothers, and from what I can tell, elves in general, they have like a normal amount of kids, like 1 to 3. And Fëanor is out here with 7 kids. And on one final note, this poor copy, it still looks nice, but it's getting so fragile, and like it's old. But I really shouldn't have traveled with it, because I was like, you know, I had it in my bag and I was sticking it into the back of the like backseat compartment in the plane, and now I fear my vintage copy of the Silmarillion is going to be in complete shreds by the time I'm done with it. And I do wonder if this was ever read before me, because the spine is completely unbroken, but also like it doesn't open very easily up, like it opens up to the points that I've read it, but after that, or I don't know, maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe it was just like in bookshelves for a long time and it like was compressed back into shape. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was never actually read and if this copy just sat on a shelf somewhere for years. I do think that depending on how obsessed with it I continue to get, I might get a fresh copy is a weird way to say it, but I might get a new copy just so I can highlight in it, because so many of these lines are really, really good. And it's not even that I want to make notes like commentary, because often, as I've said before, I use sticky notes for that. I just want to underline some of these really, really good lines just because they're beautiful and poetic. But yes, this is all. So up to page 156 now, and I fear I may be well and truly hooked, because there were really interesting stuff going on. There was really interesting stuff going on, like the creation of man and the sun and moon being created out of the last remaining light of the trees. Really cool stuff like that. And the whole time I was like, okay, but what are Fëanor and sons up to? Where is my elves? Fëanor and sons were indeed up to some stuff. Fëanor is dead now, and he died as he lived, just being really over dramatic and extra about it. No, how do I phrase this? Just being really over dramatic and compelling about it. In fact, he is a person who was so perpetually big bad that as he died and his spirit was relinquished, it was filled with such passion that it burned up his body to ash, like Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope, except like the opposite of that. He just couldn't be normal about literally anything. The next big thing that happened was that his eldest son Maethros was captured by Melkor, aka Middle-earth Satan, and then his cousin, one of them, I think Fingon, but it might have been Finrod, because I confused Finrod and Fingon. No, it was Fingon, because Fingon is the son of Fingolfin, because they both have a G in their names. And Finrod is the son of Finarfin, because they both have a R in their names. So his cousin Fingon, who they were friends, he was like, hey, I'm gonna go see what my cousin is up to. And he started to play a little tune, and then Maethros echoed his little tune, and they just echolocated each other via singing. And then he found him, and Maethros was like, hey, could you put me out of my misery? And Fingon was like, no. And then the big deity whose name is escaping me because I don't have my physical copy and thus my notes in front of me right now, sent eagles and was like, you guys are getting saved. And because both of these cousins loved each other, they temporarily mended the grudge between their peoples. And yeah. And then, just as I was getting into the family drama and who was going to be king of what and what Fëanor and sons were up to, we took yet another pause to talk about elf geography, which I could not keep up with. This room is echoey. So the creation of the sun and moon got me thinking about like day and night now being a thing, and day and night being how we traditionally tell time. So it said that before that, elves told time, like days and years, via the light of the trees, even though I'm not sure how that would work. Like, were they waning and flowering again? And that's how they told time?
The book said every 7 hours they would grow and then wither again.
I think it was years.
It literally said hours.
Oh, I don't know that.
Read the beginning.
But I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about like whether they would be able to tell time by the stars at all, years-wise. But then also, if elves live so much longer, how much need would they have to tell time? I know that they most likely need to sleep because they have mentioned elves sleeping as the drama has continued, but like, do they have, if there aren't days and nights traditionally, do they have day-night cycles? Like, how long do they need to sleep? And when do they come of age? And when do they come into maturity? I don't know. You know, I also think that it would be interesting if elves aged weird. Like, if the way they physically matured looked alien to us. Like, maybe they just get really tall before they fill out. Or the opposite. Or, like, they just grow proportionally. But yeah, so the next big stop we had was the geography chapter. Which I'm gonna have to reread it again because I was just so lost. This is perhaps poor reading comprehension on my part, but I'm very, very bad at visualizing places. And there was a map here, and I kept flipping back and forth to figure out what went where. But I was just very confused. As the map was being described, things were also happening. Like, people were moving, and new cities were being built, and kingdoms were being founded. And I was like, oh, what is where? And this has been the continued experience of Silm reading. It's every time I start to get into it, it takes a sharp left turn and starts mapping rivers. We have just lost the plot. It is somewhere in East Beleriand, or maybe West Beleriand, because I forgot which direction it goes into. I was also at this point thinking a lot about elf original sin, but that is a topic for another time. Alright, status report as of page 240. Earlier, when I was complaining about losing track of the elf diaspora? No, I think it's diaspora. Earlier, when I was complaining about losing track of the elf diaspora, I did not know how good I had it, because now we've gotten to the human bloodlines, and I don't know who any of these people are. It'll be like, so-and-so is descended from so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And I'm like, So when I started this, I said that it felt very much like reading the Bible, like the creation myth and then the foundation of things, and some of the language felt very biblical, like in the fullness of time and it came to pass and things like that. But now we're past most of the lore. The world has been built, all the big things have happened, all of the children of Iluvatar, aka the species, from what I understand, have come into being. There's no wizards yet, but I think those will be sent later, and there's no hobbits yet, but I think hobbits are considered a kind of man. But now that that's all out of the way and we're just focusing on wars and family sagas and bloodlines, now it's feeling more like a cycle of myths or an epic cycle. It's reminding me of Norse sagas, like, you know, the Ring cycle and the Eddas and things like that, where it's just, here's a cool family and here's how they were involved with each other and here's how everything went badly, because often it goes badly. And I'm really, really enjoying it. I know I keep saying family drama in this because the family drama is so good. So up until now, I've kind of been giving recaps of everything that's happened,
but by now so much has happened, and a lot of it was really cool, but I don't even know what to focus on. We had Turgon's sister and nephew, which that was a plotline I really liked, with her like running off into the wild and getting married to this emo. I can't tell if that was a consensual marriage or not. Like, did it start out consensual and he slowly turned abusive, or did he trap her there? I can't tell, but it's very uncomfortable nonetheless. So we had the tale of Beren and Luthien, which had a lot of really cool moments in it. I know that they have a whole text of their own, and even though it's not necessarily my favorite of the stories thus far, I enjoyed it enough that I think I would like to pick up this separate volume that is Beren and Luthien. Wow, this is like a gateway drug. I'm like, oh, well, you know, I can read Beren and Luthien, and once I get to Turin Turanbar, I should probably pick up Children of Húrin. Am I being sucked into a cult? Yes, Beren and Luthien was very fun. There was a magic dog involved. Some of Fëanor's sons were there, living up to their reputation as Fëanor's sons. At one point, Beren had to hand a Silmaril over to his father-in-law, and he was like, I've got it in my hand. And the father-in-law was like, cool. Show it to me. And he held up his empty stump and was like, it is even now in my hand. And that's just, so far, Huan the magic dog, I think, is dead. Finrod is dead, although he died in just the most epic way, in that he ripped at he won a song contest with Melkor, a Battle of the Bands contest with Melkor, and then he physically attacked a werewolf with his teeth until he won the fight with the werewolf. By this point, Melkor is being called Morgoth more often than Melkor. I just think that Melkor sounds better. This is Middle-earth Satan. I just think that Melkor sounds better because I think Morgoth, like, it has those all sounds that influenced the Dark Lord standard of all fantasy thereafter. So I just hear that name and I'm like, yeah, of course that's what the Dark Lord is called. But Melkor sounds a little more fresh, and I like those. It's got a harder, crisper sound that I think is more foreboding. So yes, Finrod is dead. Fingon is also dead. Fingolfin is also dead. A lot of people are dying. In fact, a lot of people are dying who I forgot were alive. I kept being like, wait, where's Finarfin? And then I checked, and Finarfin apparently never came. Like, he stayed behind in Valinor, and I just missed that. And I just kind of assumed he was there with everyone else. And yet, even with all of these people dying and every one of the older generations dying slowly, one by one, none of Fëanor's sons are dead yet. And I can only imagine it's because of their doom. They have not yet suffered enough. Rooster. I hope the sound of birds and roosters is not bothersome. I'm hoping, oh my gosh, there's a baby apple on the tree. So right outside of this window, there's an apple tree and then a pomegranate tree, and their branches kind of intermingle. I think those are all apples. I think it's too early for the pomegranates to start bearing fruit. So at different points, it talks about the oath of Fëanor's sons awakening in them, that being the oath they made to their father before he died, that they had to get the Silmarils and go after the Silmarils no matter what. And it's interesting because, again, discussing this with my friend, I learned that some people consider this oath to be supernatural, like a kind of mind control that physically takes over their bodies. And that's why these otherwise very heroic, noble people go absolutely insane and start, you know, imprisoning allies and attacking kinsmen when the Silmarils are threatened. And I think that's such a boring way to interpret this oath. It doesn't need to be supernaturally binding, to be psychologically binding, to be this thing that because of the way they were brought up, they feel that they have to do. I think that's far, far more compelling, because if they had to do it, that's so boring. There's no drama there. They're just slaves being dragged along. But if they're choosing to do it, if we have this noble heroism on one side and these horrible acts on the other, how are they reconciled? Is that not just the central tension? And you know, they're sacrificing a lot
by following this oath. Curufin, when he left the city that he was staying in, I forgot which one, I think Finrod's city, the Fëanor's sons, they like broke peace with the city they were staying because they had to go after the Silmarils and attack and whatnot. And one of them left his son behind who was like, no, Dad, what you're doing is wrong and I can't stand by it. In opposition to that, I forgot where I was going with this, but I think it's interesting for the oath to be not supernaturally mandated, but culturally honor mandated. I feel similarly about the curse that the Noldor are under, which I don't think I've talked about up until now, but I haven't talked about any of this in particular detail. If you want the summary, do not be listening to me. But you know, after the Noldor killed the Teleri, we were told that because they'd done this thing, they were cursed and none of their endeavors would go well and what have you. And that's why I feel Fëanor's sons aren't dead yet, because their endeavors haven't gone badly enough yet. But I don't think this is a curse so much as it's a prophecy. It's not, I'm gonna punish you because you've done this thing. It's because you've done this thing and you have this stain upon your hands, the things you do cannot go well because you have this hanging over you. I joked earlier about elf original sin, but that was something I was genuinely thinking about. So there was no, even though the beginning of this story did line up with basic Christian beliefs of, you know, creation and Satan and what have you, there was no Adam and Eve story. There was no fall. I don't mandate that all fictional stories have to hold by Christian beliefs, but Tolkien was a deeply Catholic man, and I don't think he himself would have been okay with his story not being a little bit Christian. But even though there was no fall, it talked about how the song that created the world was imperfect. It was corrupted from the original plan that Iluvatar had for it. So yes, I'm excited to keep going and see how Fëanor's sons get messed up. I think this, even though we've had many battles with Melkor, this last one that they call the fifth battle feels like it was very sober and substantial. A lot more named characters died. So next is I don't remember what, it's of Turin Turambar, and it's a long chapter. And I know of Turin Turambar because he is one of my friend's favorites, and I know that nothing in his life goes well, ever. So I'm excited to see how badly it goes, and to see that Tolkien is an equal opportunist. And it's not just the Noldor that are cursed. This guy can be super cursed as well. Speaking of look, she is just in very rough shape. Part of me feels guilty. Part of me is like, you are a mass market paperback. The point of you is to be read. Why do you look like you've been mauled by a tiger? But it is a very old book. She's an old woman. I would guess from the graphic design and the quality of the paper, like late 70s, early 80s. What can we do? Books were made for reading. And that is all. I've finished it. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of myself. I'm done. Pages 240 through 370 something, just like in one go. I went through Turin Turambar's very bad life and his dad's equally bad life, because they were both cursed. The ruin of Doriath, the ruin of Gondolin. I'm pretty sure theirs happened the other way around, actually. I don't remember the order of operations anymore. And then Maethers and Maglor finally getting their hands on the Silmarillion, unfortunately. And then that was the end of the Silmarillion, aka the part that's actually about the Silmarils. And then there was the section on the Men of Numenor, and then there was the section on the Rings of Power, which the last couple of pages of that were really just a summary of Lord of the Rings, and it's actually made me want to reread Lord of the Rings, which I haven't done since I was 13. I might just reread Fellowship, because it was talking about Gondor, and I was like, wow, I miss Boromir. By the end of the Silmarillion, all of Fëanor's sons are dead except for Maethers and Maglor, and they're just these two brothers together, and they're both doing horrible things for this oath that neither of them even fully believe in anymore, because there was a section where Maglor was like, hey, at this point, I think the eternal darkness might be what's in for us anyway, because we're doing all these horrible things. And Maethers was like, but our oath. And he just went with it because that's his older brother. And it's so tragic because Maethers was the best of them, and yet.
And then the last page of the Silmarillion was kind of a reflection on it, and I don't have my copy on me right now because I was enjoying it so much that my brother actually stole my copy. He's actually making faster progress than I am, which I'm a little bit jealous about, but it's fine. So the last pages of the Silmarillion say something like, "And this is how it is." What do they say? I remember it made me emotional, and it made me think about what I'd been saying about like original sin and how it was like this, but it didn't have to be like this, but there isn't any way that it wound up being. And it's that idea of doom and being a little bit cursed. In these last 100 or so pages, I felt a real sense of grief that everything was changing. All the characters I knew were slowly dying one by one. I knew it was gonna happen, and yet there was still grief in it, and like Thingol and Melian were killed, and all of Fëanor's sons, and Beren and Luthien, and just everyone I knew was slowly dying, and everything was slowly changing. All the kingdoms were falling, and everyone was fleeing, and then the landscapes themselves were changing. And my primary story digesting philosophy is about there being love and good and beauty and hope, and also tragedy and death and grief. And I don't think they cancel each other out. I think both emphasize the other. I think you cannot truly feel the impact of one without the other. And I don't want to flatten the richness or the depth of a text by bringing in a preconceived notion, but I do think that my own philosophy of how I try and read stories, especially fantasy, aligns with how Tolkien likes to do it. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I did really enjoy those last couple of pages of the Silmarillion. And then the sections on Numenor and the Rings of Power were just such a slog to get through after that, which I feel bad about. But I was like, all of my guys are dead. Where are my guys? Numenor, I'm pretty sure there's a separate text that's like on the fall of Numenor, and I think I would enjoy that more because I would have time to become invested and get to know the characters a little bit more, and I wouldn't still be grieving Maethers and Mackler. I think I'm going to have to take some time to digest and reflect and talk about overall closing thoughts on the text as a whole and not on this last section, but yeah, thus far, that's what's going on.
Before I read this book, I said I guessed that it would be more interesting when analyzing retroactively than reading initially. And even though I did enjoy the initial read way more than I thought I would, I think I may have been onto something because I already want to reread it. And this time I want highlighters in 20 colors, I want sticky notes, I want charts, I want to be flipping around like it's a textbook. I want to study this, just maybe not this copy because it looks a little like it's been mauled by a tiger. In my defense, the cover was fully attached when I handed it over to my brother, so So, concluding thoughts, how do I feel? This was a reading experience that was so rich. There was a little bit of Bible and a little bit of myth and a little bit of epic cycle and a little bit of chivalric and a little bit of medieval romance. All of these are influences that fantasy authors play with all the time, but a lot of the time it doesn't work because they don't know the source well enough. They don't know what they're doing. And I also don't, I think, know any of these sources well enough that I could emulate them successfully. But I do know them well enough to recognize that Tolkien knows what he's doing. So all of these bits of old literary influences made it feel like a real document, like a real ancient work of text. Now, the way that Tolkien writes at a line level can be difficult for a modern reader, especially in this book where he's not even writing in scene most of the time. It's a lot of summary. It's a lot of summary and very minimal dialogue and admittedly very thorough descriptions of landscapes, which was particularly hard for me because landscapes are hard for me to describe. Setting in general is hard for me to even picture in my head. It's one of my biggest flaws when I'm writing fiction. People are like, where are they? I'm like, I don't know, they were in a room. Maybe they were even outside, which is the complete antithesis of how Tolkien writes. Tolkien is like, here's where they were. And I'm like, cool, so who were they? And he's like, they had a name. And their grandfather also had a name. So for all that at the line level I would sometimes get lost, Tolkien's sense for what makes a good story beat is so sharp. I have all of these individual moments just burned into my brain, like Fëanor with his sword at his brother's neck, and Fingon trying to find his cousin via echolocation by singing a song and hearing it sung back to him through the mountains and singing the song. Beren holding out the stump of his empty wrist and going, "Here, I have a Silmaril in my hand." And, oh gosh, I forgot her name, but the younger sister of Turgon, the one who ran away and married a dark elf, potentially unwillingly. I can just see her sitting in the dark with her son and teaching him to love the bright, beautiful, faraway city where she comes from and wants to return to. These are moments that feel epic, not in the way that people used the word epic when I was a preteen, but epic as in mythic, having a sense of grandiosity is not a word, but having a sense of grandness and importance. And, you know, they felt like they could have come out of a myth, which I keep saying because it's true. There's a sense that they're almost universal, like you've boiled the story down to its essences. And I think that pure storytelling is why I really enjoyed myself, even though there were sections I had to drag myself through. Thematically, you kept coming back to this idea of evil as a corrupting influence. Evil is something that infiltrates and rots. So Tolkien kept setting up something beautiful with a little seed of evil in it, and then showing how that little seed of evil grew and corrupted the whole, like yeast, kind of spreading throughout dough. I don't think I came up with that myself. I'm pretty sure that is a Bible metaphor. Thank you, Bible. But look at the Silmarils themselves. They're the epitome, not the epitome, but they're the highest mark, they're the highest example of craftsmanship and artistry, and they carry the literal light of the trees within them. Eventually, they carry the only light of the trees within them after the trees get drunk by a spider. So they're literal beacons of light and ultimate beauty. But they become the root of all this destruction because of selfish desire for them, but also just because of the oath that Fëanor's sons take was taken for good reasons. They wanted to honor their father, and yet it messed up literally everything.
Okay, last location change, because thinking, oh yeah, I have 10 minutes to myself is the way to cast a family curse upon yourself and cause your great aunt to drop by and everyone in the house to wake up. But as I was saying, the Silmarils themselves and what they do to the people and the world feel like a warning against allowing evil, but also that just the pursuit of good isn't wholly safe if you don't guard yourself. And also nothing lasts forever. Now, will I now become a Tolkien girly, the kind that has an entire shelf devoted to multiple editions of the same book? Probably not, because for one, I have no shelf space. And also because this wasn't a book that was eating my brain the way that other books have done in the past. Like, I read it in 22 days, which is not nothing considering how dense it was, but it's not I'm cobbling this up speed. I did enjoy it and I found it interesting, but like in a calm, methodical way. Except Numenor, which I had to drag myself through up until the end when it was revealed to be an Atlantis retelling, and I was like, hey, what? By then it was ended and there was nothing else for me to be interested in. So yeah, I probably won't be running immediately to read Tolkien's entire output, but I will get to it eventually, and when I do, I will enjoy it. I am proud of myself for getting this done, if even just because I feel like I know more things now, like how they have you read classics in school so you can recognize the allusions. This morning on my Pinterest, I came across a picture that I think I would have assumed was a fairy tale, or like an illustration piece of art that I think I would have assumed was a fairy tale illustration, but I was like, wait, is that Luthien and Huon the magic dog? And it was, and I was proud of myself for guessing it, and I was like, oh, I probably have a ton of art that I thought was interesting that was actually Silmarillion art, because the Silmarillion artists appear to be very talented. But now I am off to return from my trip so that I will have a stable background again, and I think when I do get back, I'm gonna dig up my copy of Fellowship again, because now I miss Boromir.